I think we need to bring about a human society which sees its first purpose as being maintaining the capacity of Earth to support life. Okay? We've got to see ourselves as custodians of the planet, not rapists. And that is a complete shift from our current societies. I think it will only happen when we go through this crisis. It's not going to happen before. But in the middle of it, if we're going to be able to hang on to civilization at all, we have to say the maintenance of life is by far the major objective of humanity, and everything else comes secondary to that.
Wow, we've heard two master classes today, one from Ye and one from Steve, and it's the kind of talk that makes me think, should I laugh or cry? Because so much of what he said shows the utter insanity and absurdity of the economics profession, and yet the consequences, of course, are so dire because of the influence that they have had. And that's what we have to deal with. So basically we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, from our online audience. And I want to bring up Ye in a couple minutes to have a little discussion with the three of us. So let me start to see, are there any questions from our in-person audience right here? Anyone like to question or comment anything Steve has said? While you're thinking about questions, let me ask you, the IPCC is known as and functions as a kind of the mediator and a synthesizer of acceptable climate discourse from the science perspective to guide policymakers. Has the IPCC adopted Nordhaus or Keane?
Oh, Nordhaus. And Richard Toller wrote the 2014 report. And that's where they said that climate change is going to be trivial compared to virtually anything else you can name. And then the most recent report, the 2022 report, or 2023 I think, said that the damages from climate change would be the damages from climate change in the most recent IPCC report said they would be between 10 and 23% of GDP for 4 degrees of warming by 2100. Now that's all the politicians read, and they don't read that. They get their advisors to go and grab it, look at the economic section, tell me what it says, and then they come back, 10%, in 2100, that's somebody else's problem. Somebody write me a nice little speech where I can look like I care, and then we'll waffle and fool the journalists. And the journalists themselves believe this shit because most of them have done PPE, and they swallow economics as if it's gospel.
Well, my challenge to those of you in the audience and to Steve, what can we do to get Steve to be part of the ICC economic expert reviewers for the next report so that we can get some sanity into these reports, if it's not too late already, because the next report, since the IPCC doesn't operate on normal time, the next report won't be for 5 more years. But notwithstanding that, is there any chance of getting you or your colleagues to be able to contribute to that?
Even if we did, we'd be drowned out by the others. So the majority would be neoclassicals, and I'd be put down as a dissenting voice. That'd be about it. I think it's really better to try to find any politicians you know and basically slap them and then say, look, this is what the real situation is. Stop believing this garbage that you're getting from your economic advisors. This is the real situation. It's not your great-great-grandfather as a politician who's going to face this. It's you. That's what they have to learn.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Gigi Gutierrez. I'm from Argentina, and I run an agency in Miami. I work in advertising, and I run a creative agency focused on conscious consumption in Latin America. And based on your talk, what should we prioritize communicating, especially through brands and mass media, to help shift the economic narrative and drive an urgent action?
I think you have to contrast what scientists are saying to what economists are saying. That's the only real way, because most people, like when I decided to do this research, most of my non-orthodox colleagues said, don't waste your time, Steve. You'll just find that economists have used a high discount rate to discount the damages said by climate scientists. I said, well, yeah, that's probably the case, but I better check. And within half an hour, I had my head in my hands saying, "You fucking idiots," literally. Okay? You've jeopardised the existence of the humanity to hang on to your bloody paradigm. Okay, so that's the gap. And most people think economists are well-meaning, and they are. But they're like a religious extremist. Okay? They're a well-meaning religious extremist who believes chopping your head off is the best way to improve your lifestyle. Okay? So unless we expose economics in general, we're not going to undermine the credibility they've got. And the best way to do it is contrast things like Zhu and Ramanathan about 5 degrees being existential versus economists saying 7 degrees is a 0.14% fall in the rate of economic growth.
Thank you.
Other questions? John?
Yes, I'm John Nissen. I run a group called the Planetary Restoration Action Group. Mm-hmm. We're trying to promote the idea that one could refreeze the Arctic, cool the planet, and restore the planet to a sustainable, productive, and healthy state. It can be done. We've done the calculations of what you could do, and probably need to include stratospheric aerosol injection in that mix. But I think of all this rubbish is generated by the fossil fuel companies who see anything that smacks of climate change. Because people blame it on CO2, they see climate change mustn't exist because it impacts our ability to generate CO2 and so on.
Yeah.
And the activists don't help themselves by saying, oh, well, the problem with SRM, solar radiation management, or geoengineering, is that it opens the door to letting them out of jail free, the fossil fuel companies. Yeah. And that's used so commonly by people who are activists but are against, against SRM.
To me, I often make the analogy, I've got my positive and negative attitudes to Winston Churchill, but I make the analogy to the Second World War. And nobody took Churchill seriously until Poland had fallen, France had fallen, and there were 250,000 British troops facing extermination on the beaches of Dunkirk. Then they took him seriously. Okay? And we're in a similar situation now because it isn't just the fossil fuel companies who want to continue with fossil fuels. They obviously make the most money out of it, but we all do. Okay? It's a lifestyle which is incomprehensible to our predecessors. The fact we can have a hot shower, okay? Kings had that 150 years ago. We all have it today. So we're locked into our suffering and our pleasures are the seal, to quote Leonard Cohen on this front. And therefore we didn't want to know it. So the economists told the fossil fuel companies what they wanted to hear, and they told the public what the public wanted to hear as well, in so many ways. That's one reason they've got away with it. Now we're at the point where we're on the brink of catastrophic change, and the question is, can we survive as a civilization, first off? Secondly, if we don't do that, can we survive as a species? Okay? Now, when you get to that particular point, you do pardon the French, what the fuck you can to reduce the damage you've already done, which means solar geoengineering has to be attempted. And we've got to get it through the heads of a lot of left-wing people that that's the situation, because, again, a lot of the left-wing policy activists are the ones who are saying we can't do it, we can't fiddle with the globe's temperature dial. We already have. Okay? Now, if we do in the reverse direction, according to those figures, West Antarctica is on the way to melting, and so is Greenland. So to stop that process, we may be forced to drop the temperature below pre-industrial levels. That's how severe things could be. And it's only going to be once we have the equivalent of 250,000 troops about to get exterminated by blitzkrieg that we're going to get politicians to realise what's necessary.
Okay.
Hi, yes, Steve. I'm really Joe Taylor. I'm a climate activist. I've said that earlier, but I'm really interested in what you've got to say, but troubled by your call to action that we should talk to politicians. And given what you've just said, which I 100% agree with about Churchill and catastrophe, I'd invite you to call for revolution. Just everything I've been hearing today tells me that this is the only way that we're going to rein in the worst behavior of our society. And it can happen very quickly. It's the beauty of revolution. You know, Lenin was languishing in obscurity in Germany in 1917, and 6 months later private property had been banned in Russia. So we can achieve radical change, but only in a revolution.
Yeah, I was once asked why I wouldn't join the Communist Party at Sydney University by the executive of the Communist Party. They ambushed me at a dinner at a friend's place. And my answer was, because when the revolution comes, the first person with his back up against the wall will be me, which is an answer they weren't ready for. Revolutions have unpredictable events on the other side, okay? Even what the people themselves wanted. So you have to be very careful in saying how you go about that. But certainly free enterprise capitalism is over, okay? In that sense. You have to have constrained capacity to produce goods and services on the planet. I think we have to try to get our production off planet as fast as possible. That's one of the revolutions I'd like to see. But all this stuff, you know, we can't be, you know, just blasé say, let's have a revolution. Okay? We have to be aware of what sort of society we wish to achieve and be bloody careful about how we go about it. And the main thing I'm looking at the moment is not so much revolution as survival.
Okay. This gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Diogo Franco from Brazil.
Yeah.
Would like to know if you believe that in this scenario, it's still possible to increase the average income of people, thinking about countries in the south of the world, and still fight climate change. It is possible to increase the average income for people.
Yeah, and we have to change the distribution of income as well. This is a revolutionary point. The rich have been getting far more than their share of the normal inequality in human society has been put on steroids by neoliberalism. And if you put the burden of readjustment on the poor, they'd starve to death. You'd have a revolution in the worst possible way if that happened. It has to be the rich who suffer in terms of their consumption. So that idea Eco Court I put up earlier was an idea of having a parallel currency where everybody gets a carbon allowance equal to the average for their country. And then you've got to spend that as well as spend your money when you go shopping, which would mean homeless people would accumulate huge buffers of these carbon credits to sell, and Elon Musk and Rupert Murdoch would exhaust their allowance before they woke up in the morning. So you have a redistribution from the rich to the poor. Something of that is absolutely vital. There's no way this can be reached by a drop in average consumption levels. It has to be the upper echelons who fall, and if you wanted to get a rotation point, if we're lucky, it's going to be about 20 or 30% of the overall range of deciles of income around the planet. But yeah, we have to see a huge reduction in the wealth of and the consumption levels of the ultra-rich.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Thank you for the great talk. My name is Florencia. I work as an energy access researcher, but my question is not about energy access. No. When I was studying my master's, I heard about also economists that are against neoclassical theories, such as yourself, but they were called ecological economics, like Herman Daly and Kate Raworth. So just wondering, is your school of thought related to that, or how is it different?
Kate's a good friend. Herman Daly, I never met Herman, but he corresponded with me fairly regularly. So some of Herman's stuff was a bit too conservative for my liking. Kate, I'm totally in tune with. But again, most of them haven't read this stuff. This is if you know the story of Hercules, one of the tasks he got was to clean out the Augean stables, go and get all the shit out. I'm the person who's done that. I've read every major neoclassical paper. So they're aware that it's bad, but they're not aware how bad it is. So I'm trying to get them to realise that as well. But definitely, the neoclassicals also try to infiltrate that area. So any area where you might get papers, neoclassicals will publish something, and they'll get published in journals which we don't get published in because we won't make the same assumptions they make. So there's a bit of a nuance, but generally ecological economics is compatible with my approach.
Okay, we're going to invite Steve and Ye to come back up here for the last 10 minutes for a little discussion, and then we'll take another question or two as part of this wrap-up. Let me just remind you, particularly of those of you who came in late, that in 10 minutes, give or take a minute or two, you may have even missed this, the Houses of Parliament will be debating on whether to ban solar radiation management and pulling down removal of carbon from the atmosphere. So as we're talking about all of this, I think, in various forms, the need for cooling, we have a debate within a 45-minute walk that I don't know what to expect, except to say that's part of the, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Just like I didn't know whether to laugh or cry and what you were saying.
Galileo once wrote that to Kepler. Shall we laugh or shall we cry?
Yes, well, and we'll maybe do a little bit of both. But all right, so my question to the two of you first is, my own perspective on this is that not only has the economics profession not been, you might say, using a British term, fit for purpose in terms of climate, but that the political profession, if you want to call it that, hasn't been fit for purpose. The legal profession hasn't been fit for purpose. The media, in my book I call it a media omerta, or code of silence, hasn't been fit for purpose. Do we have, is climate change such a problem, and it's sometimes called a quote-unquote wicked problem, that all of the sectors and professions and the best, quote-unquote, the best minds in almost every field have objectively failed in basically changing their paradigm to be able to adequately address it? And if that's the case, then what? So I'll start with you, Steve, and then Ye.
Yeah. I made the mistake of running for Parliament in Australia in 2022. The party I signed up made a few huge tactical blunders and got the lowest vote of any party running. But it made me doubly aware, and also that political party, that we don't really have what we call it a democracy. It's based on the French Revolutionary Parliament, or the left and the right, and so on and so forth. We have two bunch of ideologues shouting at each other, and we select them according to how narcissistic they are. Okay? The only people who normally run for politics are people who think they should run everything. And they used to say, was it Groucho Marx? I don't want to be a member of a club. I don't want to join a club that would have me as a member. That's the sort of person we need. If you look back at Greek democracy, of course it left the slaves out, but Greek democracy was based on what they called sortition. So rather than people having to nominate and say, vote for me, I'm fabulous, you had the top families were asked who they'd nominate, and then the people they were nominated were asked who they'd nominate, and then on you go. And what it meant was a filtering system, which meant the only sensible thing to do was to nominate the most sensible person you thought further on down the chain. And we got normal individuals, skilled normal individuals, making the decisions for Athenian society. We need something like that. Politics has to be completely reformed. But of course, it's not going to happen before we hit the brick wall.
Ye?
Well, I think a lot of these institutions and society developed within hundreds to thousands of years, way before humans and their collection of stuff and industry start to hit planetary limits. So there hadn't previously been selective pressure to select for variants that are consistent with the intrinsic planetary limits until very recently. So I think it's quite natural to not see the compatibility between what exists for problem solving in history relative vis-a-vis to what we have right now. So I think it's sort of normal in my assessment.
So basically what I'm hearing is that our society is basically not fit for purpose in terms, or it hasn't been, in terms of solving, if solving is the right word, this particular problem that is, of course, more than a problem, and we've got to figure out very quickly how to make that happen. And I guess then my next question, and it relates to what we've gotten from our audience at home here, that how can policymakers adopt a sustainable degrowth mindset in a world where private sector advancement is the prevailing economic approach? And of course, we had one response to that saying revolution, but I'm just wondering how the two of you may further respond to that.
You take
I have no idea how to, get the policymakers to adopt degrowth until we really have demonstrated actual working examples of a good life and human happiness with much, much lower energy consumption levels. I think technically we do not have the solutions. Many people working in the field are, especially activists, sorry for picking on you guys, sometimes we're selling like the revolution as if we have the answers, but I don't think we do. We have some like ideas of what needs to happen, including factor of 10 decrease in total energy consumption, as I alluded to. And there was somebody asking about the average, whether we can increase the average. I don't think that's feasible. The current average emission is 5 gigaton per year per person. And what might be feasible to aim for is probably the medium. If we go to the medium globally, we can reduce by roughly 60, 70%. So we would be operating at 1/3 of the current emissions. But even that is not enough. So that's why we have to redesign the system to do more with less. So maybe we can then cut a factor of 2. But that's still not enough. So in my best educated guess assessment, everybody, even the medium person on planet, needs to give up some of their privileges to enter into a state of sustainable livelihood. But that's not to say that we have worse lives. I think people would be obliged to share more. The community would have to be built, and we would be happier as humans on average. So even though the income would decrease, but it's not wealth in the philosophical and physiological sense. I think that would increase in contrast.
Thank you. You want to briefly?
Actually, on the revolution front, I think we need to adopt a new religion, and I'd call it Saganism. Not paganism, but Saganism. Because if you look at Carl Sagan's comments, it was all about realizing we're on this little blue dot and we have to behave in a collective fashion. We have to see, I think we need to bring about a human society which sees its first purpose as being maintaining the capacity of Earth to support life. Okay? We've got to see ourselves as custodians of the planet, not rapists. And that is a complete shift from our current societies. I think it will only happen when we go through this crisis. It's not going to happen before. But in the middle of it, if we're going to be able to hang on to civilization at all, we have to say the maintenance of life is by far the major objective of humanity, and everything else comes secondary to that.
Well said. And I'm tempted to end it there, except I'd like to see if there's another question or two from someone who hasn't spoken yet, particularly if they're female, but even if we have to, we'll take a male.
My name's Anya. I'm the current leader of True Valley School Climate Action Team. And my question is, are there any books or educational resources that you'd recommend on these topics, other than, of course, your book?
On economics, that book I wrote, the New Economics and Manifesto, is non-technical introduction to potential alternative economics. So that's one. In terms of climate, the 2 reports I put up there, the global tipping points and the state of the planet, they're both extremely readable, very well documented and laid out. So those are the references, and I can give you some after we finish the presentation, but they're all embedded in my presentation there.
Okay, and I would just add the organization that I co-founded, the Healthy Planet Action Coalition, is worth taking a look at. If you go to their website, Healthy Planet Action Coalition, you'll get some interesting and important resources. And obviously, go to the MEER.org website, and Ye and his colleagues have lots of great information and materials and videos there as well. Time for one more question over there. This gentleman.
Hi there, Andrew McMullen from the Crown Estate. This has been really, really good. It's quite apocalyptic, what we've been discussing, but I do believe that many of us in the room have got used to that idea, and we can see a happier life, as you mentioned, Dr. Ye, with less. We are going to have to hit that wall. What advice would you give to those of us who don't hold political power or hold high office? How can we get ourselves ready for when that wall is hit, and what are the things we can do to make that a softer blow, perhaps, once it happens?
Yay?
Well, to the extent that one can afford it, I would encourage travel and see the world, different economic echelon conditions. And you might realize, even if we were only consuming 5% of current energy of the UK or the US, life still goes on, and there's things to look forward to. So when you're immersing yourself into conditions that objectively corresponds to hell for the Westerner, you still see humanity. There's aspects of life. I think that gives hope and inspiration for get oneself mentally prepared, and I think that's one thing one can do.
Yeah. I'm going to sound like a prepper, but I'd be having stocks of food because at some point food supplies are going to collapse. Okay, they're going to collapse. Okay, at some point there's going to be a drought which wipes out 80% of food production. Okay, you want to have. I would prefer to have governments doing that and having warehouses full of food, preserved food to enable us to get over and recover before we have mass starvation. But something of that stage is going to be necessary. This is the greatest challenge humanity's ever faced. Okay? I don't think we can shake our heads and say, oh no, we can't do that, because we've never experienced anything like this beforehand. So I'd be prepared in that sense. Find ways to have local energy so you can actually keep energy for yourself when the central system breaks down. And I'd say pray for interesting weather in Texas, because if anything's going to wake people up, it's something catastrophic happening to Texas.
I would actually want to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's two ways to guarantee future food supply, right? One is to stock up, but eventually all stocks run dry, because your node, in my theory, when there's no source rate, eventually goes to depletion, because by default sink rate is greater than your source. The other is, of course, join MEER. More and more, there's the mainstream academic studies of how you can increase per area per invested resource production on land. So there's materials that filters light, letting in the photosynthetically active photons by rejecting everything that's just producing parasitic heat. And people have demonstrated 300% increase in yield with half the water consumption. So it is possible to create these microenvironments at the skin of the earth in over agriculture relevant depth to really maintain production. I'm quite personally optimistic about our capability to do that. Yeah. And once again, you have global mitigation as a side benefit. So if you have the time and the interest, investigate or learn agriculture, become an expert, and then come help MEER apply that to your particular crop system.
Well, thank you so much. You've been asked to join MEER, to become agriculturists, to create a revolution, to help stop Parliament from banning approaches that could actually solve the climate problem. You've heard about how the economics profession has been dominated by people who have no relationship whatsoever to the reality we're now facing, with the exception of our guest, Steve Keen, here today. You've seen how the folks at MEER, by Ye and by Peter Dines, and the folks who've helped put this together, and the folks back home who are doing this, are beginning to create workable, real solutions for people that are dealing with everyday heat that harms and destroys their lives right today in Africa and soon in other countries in the world. What I will leave you is two comments. One is, with regard to your question about what to do, how to prepare, social capital is what I would say. The most important thing to do is to build, maintain, and strengthen the connections you have with other people in your lives, with your community. That is the biggest predictor of survival and thriving there. And that's challenging in a world that is so isolationist. We're all focused on our phones and our individual lives and our, whatever's playing in the media and so forth. Social capital is number one. The second is, we've talked about tipping points. I would talk about social tipping points. We never know until something has already tipped the changes that can occur in society. So what Ye is doing, what Steve is doing, what I'm and others are doing at at a Healthy Planet Action Coalition. We're tiny little entities, individuals and groups right now, but I would argue, and obviously I'm biased, that we have reality on our side, and we will grow as long as you and your friends and your colleagues join with us or find ways on your own to take the messages you've heard today and apply them to your life. I'm sure all of us will be available to help and support you, answer any questions as time goes on. Thanks again to our wonderful school group from Somerset who are here today, and I know you'll enjoy the chocolate, and I'll be eager to hear how else you're doing with your groups and whether you can spread it to other communities around the world. So on behalf of MEER.org and Steve and Ye and everyone else, thank you so much for coming today. Keep our message front and center. There are solutions to the climate crisis, but we've got to expand the toolbox, and we need your help to do so. Thank you very much, and stay for our reception till the top of the hour.